The Democracy Forum brings you another not-to-be-missed webinar, Global Implications of AI Deregulation. In recent years, artificial intelligence has rapidly become a transformative force across industries, governments and societies. As AI technologies gain ever more momentum, debate around regulation has intensified. Some advocate for less stringent oversight to foster innovation, while others warn of the potential dangers of deregulation. So what are the global implications of AI deregulation in economic, security, geopolitical and ethical terms? And what impact could this have on our daily lives, now and in the future? To learn more about this highly topical issue, tune into our live debate, bringing your questions and comments for our expert panel.
Hello and welcome. I'm your host, Humphrey Hawksley, for our Democracy Forum debate, where we dig deep into issues sometimes overlooked by the mainstream media and commentariat, or, as in the case today, we're examining a question that sits at the crossroads of power, profit, and political stability: the global implications of artificial intelligence deregulation. As we race to harness AI for growth and strategic advantage, what needs to be regulated and what doesn't? What does all that mean for accountability, security, labor markets, that balance of power between states and those massive tech corporations that are trailblazing this revolution? To tell all, we have a plugged-in panel: JB Branch, Giulia, Gentile, Colin Gavagan, and with us throughout is Barry Gardner MP, chair of the Democracy Forum, who will sum up what we've learned and may challenge our arguments. And before all that, I have the privilege of asking Democracy Forum President Lord Charles Bruce to lay out the background and the canvas of our discussion. Lord Bruce, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon and welcome to the webinar, which considers the impact of artificial intelligence, social, political and economic, and the consequent response of governments and regulators. I'm grateful to the team at Democracy Forum for highlighting the importance of this topic and for inviting our panelists to participate today and to share their insights with us. I look forward to their comments and to the discussion that will follow under the moderation of Humphrey Hawksley. Publishing its guidance to regulators in 2024, UNESCO confirmed that more than 30 governments around the world have enacted some form of AI regulation since 2016. But few, I quote, of these initiatives match the evolving scale or complexity of the issue, observes the Financial Times, concluding that AI is already proving a helpful boost to productivity in sectors such as software, marketing, administration, but its widespread use also raises concerns. It's just over a year since the AI Action Summit held in Paris, which was attended by United States Vice President J.D. Vance. In a widely reported speech about the regulatory constraints restricting the technological evolution and application of AI, he said, I quote, "At this moment, we face the extraordinary prospect of a new industrial revolution, one on par with the invention of the steam engine," adding, "but it will never come to pass if overregulation deters innovators from taking the risks necessary to advance the ball." Clearly, the source of Mr. Vance's annoyance, the 2024 EU AI Act, appears to have overreached itself. The rules provoking, I quote, "fierce lobbying by big tech companies and the United States government, and jeopardizing the competitiveness of the EU companies and startups, and risk making Europe a permanent also-ran after the United States and China in the race to develop and harness the transformative technology." Indeed, what we appear to be witnessing is the fundamental divergence of regulatory approaches, where on one hand, Washington is in danger of under-regulating AI, while on the other hand, the EU runs the risk of over-regulating. Just over a month ago, President Trump published an executive order to replace an evolving patchwork of state-by-state regulatory initiatives with a new federal framework, claiming in justification that, I quote, "We remain in the earliest days of this technological revolution, and we're in a race with adversaries for supremacy within it. To win, United States AI companies must be free to innovate without cumbersome regulation." Several commentators were quick to observe, however, that the prevailing narrative about the administration's approach to AI governance, that it is fundamentally deregulatory, that this narrative is misleading. To describe AI policy as deregulatory is to confuse the removal of certain kinds of rules with the absence of governance itself. Or, in other words, I quote, "The Trump administration is not removing government from AI regulation, it's concentrating governmental power at the federal level, while deploying it through mechanisms not typically classified as regulation. The effect is a regulatory regime, simultaneously more intensive, but less transparent and less democratically accountable than the rulemaking it displaces." Well, thank you very much for deciding to watch our webinar today. And if you have any comments or questions for the panel, please put them through the chat.
Thank you, Lord Charles Bruce. Fascinating. The risks of over-regulating or of under-regulating. Where is the balance and what chance of getting any agreement? Our first panelist is JB Branch, the big tech accountability advocate at Public Citizen. That's a non-profit consumer advocacy organization that champions the public interest in the halls of power. He is a familiar media figure. His work on AI governance has been widely published, and he recently gave evidence to the US House Committee on Financial Services on that thorny issue of innovation versus regulation. Or does it have to be a fight? JB Branch, give us your argument.
Thank you. Well, I want to thank the Democracy Forum for the invitation to speak today, and it's a pleasure to be here to join this conversation on AI governance and civil rights and algorithmic accountability. So we're all speaking the same language, as there's many definitions. Artificial intelligence, broadly speaking, is a technology that enables machines to perform tasks that normally require human intelligence. So that would include interpreting or analyzing data, reasoning, recognizing patterns, understanding language, and making decisions. We're at a pivotal moment in the evolution of AI. For much of the past decade, debates about AI focused on innovation, efficiencies, economic growth. Today, that conversation has shifted. Policymakers, regulators, technologists, and civil society are increasingly confronting a more urgent question. It's not simply how fast AI can advance, but whether it is safe, whether it's accountable, and consistent with democratic values, human values across the globe. At the front of AI governance, we face a dual challenge. The technical side, where there's advanced AI systems that are becoming more autonomous, opaque, capable of generating unpredictable outcomes. The governance side, where regulatory frameworks remain fragmented, reactive. They're often ill-equipped to address systems that operate across borders, sectors, and social domains. And the issue that we see consistently is that traditional regulatory models were built for static technologies, clear lines of responsibilities, and they're struggling to keep up with this AI technology. And this gap between technological capacity and governance is not merely a technical problem, it's a democratic problem. It's also epistemic. It fundamentally reshapes how information is produced, assessed, and trusted. So we have the age of search engines, Google, Yahoo, where the internet operated through a distributed ecosystem of knowledge. Search engines pointed users outwards, funneled them towards diverse sources and institutions. There was a collaborative architecture between websites across journalists, scholars, communities. But in the age of the large language model with AI, that architecture is changing. Increasingly, information is being funneled through AI systems themselves. So for many users, the large language models are becoming the starting point and the end point of their research. And when AI systems mediate what people are able to see, what they're able to research and believe, there's risk for manipulation, distortion, and concentration of information power. And that question is no longer just who controls the data, it's really who controls meaning and information. Nowhere is this more visible than the intersection of AI and civil rights. AI systems are increasingly being deployed in high stakes contexts, including policing, immigration enforcement, welfare eligibility, screening for employment, housing. And these are not neutral spaces. They're domains where power, inequality, and historical discrimination have been deeply embedded. When AI is layered into those systems without robust safeguards, it's making automated decisions that can automate injustice. Consider AI-enabled surveillance. Governments and private actors now deploy facial recognition technology at large scale, and they're often justified for efficiency and security purposes. But it raises profound questions about due process, equal protection, and the right to privacy. And a case in point, in Baltimore County in the United States, an AI surveillance system erroneously flagged a bag of chips for a gun. And the result was that a child was faced with armed law enforcement with their guns drawn. We've also seen AI used by immigration authorities in the United States with ICE. These systems promised speed and precision, but there's limited transparency, there's minimal oversight, and there's few avenues to contest decisions that are made. This is also being deployed throughout the private sector. Many grocery stores or shopping departments are using AI-enabled security, which raises profound privacy questions for consumers, shoppers, even a pedestrian who's walking by a camera. So these are not abstract concerns, they're real human lives, families, and people in our community. AI systems are increasingly challenging global norms, especially in terms of harms and how regulatory systems work with that. So another case would be Grok. Grok has generated sexualized images of women and apparent children. One figure posts it at 3 million non-consensual intimate deepfake images of women and over 20,000 non-consensual intimate deepfake images of children. And the European Union's Digital Service Act is the regulatory regime that should be responding to this. European regulators have opened investigations into Grok, and 2 Asian countries have barred the LLM from being accessible. So this signals the tension that we are seeing sort of just moving forward. There are contrasting ways in which governments and platforms approach algorithmic control. There are state actors who are deploying AI systems in domains that I've mentioned before. But then there are also platforms that are using AI algorithms. Most recently in the United States, TikTok is facing regulatory scrutiny because the AI system is not allowing for critical searches of the Trump administration, including words like Epstein or ICE. And this is dangerous for the context of political misinformation. The scale at which AI can generate disinformation and misinformation is unprecedented. It's something we've never seen before, and there are far more AI agents and malicious actors than the institutions capable of monitoring and correcting them. So if algorithmic accountability is treated as a political tool rather than principled governance frameworks, we're risking being selective, arbitrary, and having illegitimate governments or democratic processes. Societies can't afford a system in which algorithmic oversight depends on geopolitical rivalry, partisan priorities, or corporate influence. What we need is a right-centered approach to AI that treats safety, transparency, and civil liberties not as competing interests, but as mutually reinforcing obligations to uphold democratic principles. And those principles would really revolve around meaningful pre-deployment evaluation, ongoing monitoring, and safety standards that are enforceable. And when there are AI systems that are deployed in high-risk contexts, especially those that impact fundamental rights, they should be governed by strict transparency, due process, and contestable requirements. We treat other regulatory spaces in this manner, and AI should be no different. If we fail to build robust governance frameworks now, we risk entrenching AI systems that amplify inequality, erode civil liberties, and distort public knowledge, and the possibility to concentrate power in opaque technical infrastructures especially amongst a few companies. But if we do succeed, we have the opportunity to align AI development with core commitments to democratic society, including accountability, equality, and the rule of law. And that's the challenge. It's also the opportunity before us today. So I look forward to exploring these issues together.
Thank you very much for that. When you say we need, you're talking about the United States, you're talking about a state within the United States. Who's going to do this?
I'm referring to this from a broad perspective, not just the United States, but it's an issue that all countries will need to resolve.
But they're not going to be agreeing on it, are they?
Well, I think there are general principles and bright line arguments that one can agree on. For example, with the Grok example, AI systems should not be targeted or harming children, for example, or creating deep fake non-consensual images. That should be a bright line understanding across values.
But when you talk, say, about democratic accountability, you're not going to get an agreement between the US and China on that, are you?
I can't imagine so, no.
So who is leading this regulation in a global sense? Because you have national governments or regional governments at best, like the European Union, but this is very much a transnational technology, isn't it? So is it the US, the EU, and China? Are they driving this?
I would say, well, right now the EU is definitely far and ahead, the sort of leader in global AI regulations. But I think what is likely to happen in the future is almost similar to trade agreements where countries are coming into agreements in terms of AI principles, whether that's with regard to data usages, whether that's in regards to transparency requirements. I think that's almost the most likely situation in terms of regulating AI consistently across borders.
Okay, so it sort of becomes a regional to region or a bilateral agreement in something. I want to ask you a question from Dan Krogan here, which you've touched on, but what are the long-term risks of investing in unconstrained AI innovation compared to the immediate economic risks of maintaining a cautious status quo, which I take it you are advocating the cautious status quo?
Right. Well, so I mean, the long-term risks in terms of unconstrained AI innovation, I mean, there are folks right now who are arguing that we might be in the midst of an AI bubble where governments across the world and capital is flowing to these AI companies without any, real thought as to performance in terms of how they're actually, expanding or their usage rates. And so, I think we're moving towards a process in which there is all of this AI hype and the belief that AI is going to resolve a whole slew of problems that we have throughout the world without much sensibility in terms of whether or not that's possible, whether or not there's quality control.
Okay,
With regard to the right,
it might naturally. So I just want to one thing very quick before I leave you. When you started off, you talked about the false stuff that comes from AI, and then AI teaches itself, and that falsehood becomes a truth. So in research and facts, are we going to be dealing with two different truths? Or as our late Queen said over an issue with the family, recollections may vary?
Actually, I think it's more of the latter. I think it's not two different truths. I think it's everyone's going to have their own personalized large language model that is accustomed to their habits, accustomed to the websites that they visit, and so that's going to be curated towards individuals. And so I envision us all almost sort of having our own individual ecosystems. The problem, and that's kind of what we're dealing with right now with the proliferation of folks finding their own independent media as opposed to traditional media sources, podcasts, and things along those lines.
Yeah. Thank you so much for that. Stay with us. We are now going to go to our second speaker, Dr. Giulia Gentile, lecturer of law at the University of Essex, whose research focuses on the promotion of human rights and the digital society. She too has given evidence to the British Parliament and the European Commission and is a co-director of artificial at Decopo. That's a group of business people, scholars, and policymakers who look ahead as to what the AI world might look like. The global implications of AI deregulation. Dr. Giulia Gentile, tell us, what does that world look like?
Thank you. Thank you so much, Humphrey. And it's great to be able to share with you a few reflections after this very interesting, I would say, passionate intervention that really raises some very interesting points. Building on what has been already said, I think that one of the primary questions that we need to ask ourselves is what we mean by progress. And I think that this is one of the core issues that strike at the really essence of democracy. And this is because I think as society, we are slightly confused and probably also misled when it comes to thinking about progress and technology. So progress, we can look at it as, of course, the use of technology for the improvement of society on a large scale, if not for the benefit of all, right? Let's think about medicine, let's think about science, let's think about different forms of technologies that have emerged across the centuries, or even the wheel, how the wheel has been used, of course, to facilitate transportation, and also the way in which we could reach one another much faster than just by walking. But this is slightly different from what technology is in itself, because the reality of technology, the material reality of technology is slightly different. Whenever technology emerges, and here we've been talking about AI, the reality is that there are, of course, infrastructures, investments, in particular in the case of AI, significant investments that are building the future of this technology. And there are therefore also relationships of ownership and power that drive the way in which the technology is developed. So the result is that we cannot necessarily assimilate technology to progress, meaning that technology, and this is what is happening with AI, is currently in the hands of a few companies, of a few very powerful departments of states across the world. And inevitably, this leads to emboldening these actors that can therefore exercise their position of power and advantage, if you will, in relation to those who might not have access to technology, or those who might be impacted by this technology. So I think whenever we talk about AI, we need to be really, I think, careful in distinguishing what is at stake, the technology in itself, and therefore, of course, also the actors that are involved in this technology, the few companies that, of course, are driving this technological change, or rather human progress, which is much broader and could be measured against the improved conditions of the society at large. So if we start from this assumption, when we discuss about the tension that exists between regulation and deregulation of AI, we are precisely also playing with the dichotomy that exists between technology and progress. It means that when we deregulate, we want to foster a technology, but we're not necessarily, as society, as regulators, facilitating human progress in the form of equal access to technology, ensuring, as already been mentioned by the first speaker, that the technology is not harmful, that has sufficient safeguards, and therefore is not leading to unpleasant and unwanted results. So in a way, regulation is the tool that allows regulators to foster a hierarchy of values, a hierarchy of legal tools, a hierarchy of mechanisms and therefore values that are of the essence to ensure that society can be protected and also can move towards a specific goal. This is what regulation is about, ensuring that behaviors can be constrained, can be controlled, and therefore can be molded toward the achievement of specific goals. But by contrast, if we allow deregulation, what we are fostering, of course, is a model that is chaotic, right? Where it's not really clear what are the rules of the game, and that therefore can also support the strengthening of power position that we just described, and that are emerging in the market and are ultimately consolidating power, lobbying influence, as well as important means of control through technological tools in relation to the rest of the society. So in a way, looking at a future in which AI is deregulated means looking at the future that is definitely less ordered, less governed by principles, by values, but rather by the technology and those that are behind the technology. So it would lead to a rule of the technology rather than a rule of law, which is an interesting new phenomenon that in a way collocates itself in an interesting set of events that are transforming the democracy as we know it since the aftermath of the Second World War. And in particular, when we deregulate this technology, there are inevitably also risks. So in a way, the deregulation of this technology that is taking place in the United States, but to a certain extent also in the European Union with the digital omnibus proposals that we have seen emerge since the end of 2025, the inevitable consequence is also heightening the risk that we are exposed to as a society vis-a-vis AI. And from my research focused on justice systems and the legal profession, the risks are numerous and difficult also to manage. Think about the fake citation cases that are emerging in UK courts, but also across the US and various other jurisdictions in which we have lawyers and judges relying on large language models. So the fake information that has been mentioned already by the first speaker that infiltrates written pleadings, documents that are produced in judicial settings that nonetheless have the unfortunate consequence of impacting clients. And we're talking about here people with rights, with claims that are trying to vindicate their positions vis-a-vis courts, vis-a-vis other private parties that nonetheless are undermining their objectives because of a use of AI that is just reckless and uncontrolled. And let's consider about, even more importantly, the risk that we see that judges may become dependent on AI. So for instance, in the UK, there is a rolling out of AI. Copilot has been embedded now in several courts across the country. And what strikes me is that, of course, these tools can help judges in their own activities. But at the same time, could we imagine a future in which judges are dependent on the technology, and therefore the principle of judicial independence, having judges that are impartial vis-a-vis the parties of the case, might be mitigated, if you will, by the influence of AI. So I conclude here with this open question for discussion.
Thank you. That is just. Is there? Unfortunately, Jeff Bezos and Mark Zuckerberg couldn't make it to the Democracy Forum, so ask you, is there a tech company that is adhering to your argument, that is joining what you want to do, or is it that they're all lobbying against regulation and you're lobbying for it?
Well, the reality is that it's not in their interest to, of course, embrace this kind of argumentation. But I think that
it's in their interest in the long term, because you said there's human progress versus technology.
Definitely.
Yeah.
So what I think that what matters is to change the public awareness around these topics, the way in which we talk about AI and the way in which we see AI impacting our lives. So if the public narrative around AI gets it right and delivers the message to the public around the tensions that exist between technology and progress. Yes.
Is it not the case that AI is moving far faster than public opinion will on this? And we can see what's happening in the US, and that the power of the tech companies to lobby governments leaves whatever the public think way behind, because most of us don't understand it. So where does that lead what you're trying to do? Are they too powerful to take on?
I don't think so. I think we have had different examples across history of titans, if you will, that were perhaps trying to hijack democracy in different ways. We're talking about here a technology, perhaps, hijacking of democracy, but it doesn't mean nonetheless that, unfortunately, and this is the outcome if we don't have regulation, it doesn't mean that catastrophes won't take place. And when the catastrophes will take place, then the social awakening will come. So in a way, regulation could help us avoid these catastrophic events.
Catastrophic. And can I just, because I asked this to JB as well, who's going to regulate what? Because you mentioned democracy, but China will be regulating in favor of authoritarianism. So, and this is a transnational technology. So how is that going to work?
Well, that is one of the challenges, right, of a technology that is so transnational and impactful on the global level, and what are the peculiarities of different jurisdictions. Inevitably, differences will remain, but it doesn't mean nonetheless that, of course, there are different values that can foster societies that are freer, that are more democratic, vis-a-vis societies that instead do not embrace those values, and therefore also might be lacking protections for individuals, and therefore might be less accepted.
Well, sorry, one of our audience, Peter Cornish, I think touches on this. He says, what does the 2026 mandate for ideologically neutral AI mean in practice, and how will it be measured? Very short answer to that.
Well, not AI is ideologically neutral. So that would be my answer.
It's not ideologically neutral. Okay. All right. Thank you very much for that. Stay with us, because we will be coming back to you. We are now going to a very short break and then on to our third speaker. Welcome back. And now on to our third speaker, Professor Colin Gavagan, Professor of Digital Futures at the University of Bristol, deeply knowledgeable about our subject. He's worked in New Zealand for many years, where he became the first and founding chair of the police expert panel on emergent technologies. And among his many writings are Regulating AI and Employment Rights, and Technology's Ability to Escape the Legal System, that we just heard about from now. So amid all that, Colin Gavagan, what are the global implications of AI deregulation? Share with us your views.
Well, thank you very much, Humphrey, and thank you very much for the Democracy Forum for giving me this platform today. I should start off by saying I thoroughly enjoyed the comments from the first two speakers and pretty much endorse them all. So I'm going to try and add something a little bit different to that. At first glance, if you're thinking of the global state of AI regulation at the start of 2026, it can look like a pretty binary terrain. What Lord Bruce called in his opening comments a fundamental divergence of regulatory approaches. So on the one hand, we have the European Union implementing its first of its kind AI Act, a specific body of rules that apply to artificial intelligence, and that elevates safety and human rights among its priorities. On the other pole, we have the Trump administration in the US pursuing what is widely seen as an aggressive deregulatory policy platform around AI and around big tech in general. And orbiting around those, fueling their respective gravitational pools, we have what Mark Carney recently called the middle powers, nations like the UK and Canada trying to plot their own courses despite the pull of the Brussels effect to Europe and what's been called in some quarters now the Mar-a-Lago effect, the draw from the US. I'd like to suggest, though, that the true picture is a bit less simple than that we should be wary of overly simplistic narratives and false dichotomies between the pro and anti-regulatory approaches, and in fact between innovation and regulation. Now, one reason why I think that binary framing doesn't quite capture the whole story was nicely summarised by Lord Bruce also in his opening comments when he pointed out that another framing of the struggle in the US really is between not just pro and deregulatory voices, but between the White House and states and regulators. I'd also say that whether or not AI should be subject to regulation isn't really the issue. That's not really a choice. It already is regulated everywhere. Even in the US, there's a lot of regulatory activity going on around AI. Now, some of that involves new laws. An example that I'm taking a lot of interest in at the moment, California and New York led the way. A growing list of other states are following. The implementation of guardrails around chatbots and AI companions. Some of it involves the enforcement of old laws. The Federal Trade Commission has taken investigative steps against several providers of AI chatbots. Then we have the courts, where civil actions have been raised against AI providers on the basis of variously copyright infringement, product liability, negligence. The Trump's AI action plan and the new deregulation task force is going to lean hard on regulators and on states to soft pedal any such regulatory steps. And only this month, we've seen the FTC roll back a decision against an AI tool that allowed for the creation of fake online reviews. We're likely to see state legislature challenge too. But I think there's still an important lesson here. And it's that AI, like any other technology, doesn't emerge into a legal and regulatory vacuum. There's a lot of law lying about. Intellectual property law, privacy law, consumer protection law, employment law, and all the rest of it. The absence of AI-specific rules like the AI Act doesn't mean that we're operating in a wholly unregulated space, even for now, in the USA. A second observation for now is that the innovation or regulation binary framing is misleading at a pretty core level. The narrative from the deregulatory regimes and also from more deregulatory voices within the EU like Mario Draghi is one that sees regulation as inherently stifling of innovation. We saw this reflected in the narratives from the last two UK governments as well, with their talk of blockers getting in the way of the growth agenda that they saw as being driven by AI. The truth, again, I think is more complicated. Some kinds of regulation certainly do stifle some kinds of innovation. Other kinds of regulation are beneficial to some kinds of innovation. Think about intellectual property protections, preventing other people stealing the inventions of ingenious and enterprising people, or about competition law that, at least when it works, prevents incumbent actors using their dominant market position to freeze out new competitors. Product safety and consumer protection laws can also contribute to an environment where a new product is trusted enough that consumers will take a chance on it. A glance through the recent history of tech regulation tells an interesting story. The big players have tended to have a pretty ambivalent record when it comes to regulation. Back in the 1980s, when the VCR was still an exciting new toy, the entertainment industry fought hard for regulators to prevent Sony from selling a product that would allow their shows to be taped and shared, allowing people to fast forward over the adverts and things. Fast forward to the early 2000s, and there's the very same Sony corporation fighting the very same fight, but on the other side, this time against the file sharers of Napster. Big tech companies make extensive use of the Digital Millennium Copyright Act, Section 230 of the Communications Act, which gives them immunity from liability for third-party content, and various other regulations when it suits them to do so. They're not anti-regulation. They have an ambivalent record on regulation, depending on whether or not it suits their interests. My very final reflection is this. We talk about regulating AI, but really the conversation is about, as Giulia put it, the people behind the technology, the developers, the owners, and the users of AI. The big tech giants who dominate the field and could do so to an even greater extent if allowed to, and also the employers, the retailers, the police forces, the governments who make use of this technology. We need to be careful that AI doesn't serve as a smokescreen for decisions and actions that are very human and that we wouldn't have deemed acceptable otherwise. Now, none of this is to say that there aren't tensions and struggles, attempts to move the dial this way or that between regulation and deregulation. But the starting point shouldn't be, should we regulate AI? We do, we must, and we always will. And no one seriously disagrees with that. The question is how we do it and how we make sure that regulation gives effect to our values and priorities and is effective in so doing. Thank you very much.
Colin, thank you. That was incredibly insightful. And if I interpret what you said correctly, there are enough laws in place at the moment to push this regulation, deregulation debate aside and to start implementing those laws?
I wouldn't go that far. I would say there are a lot of laws at the moment. My starting point when I'm looking at a new technology is always, let's see what we have at the moment. Let's see if the laws we have at the moment are adequate to deal with this new technology. And if they are not, why are they not? Because we need to identify where the gaps are and why they come about before we implement anything new. I'm not entirely convinced that we have everything we need right now, but we do have quite a lot to be going on with.
And can I ask the same question that I asked Giulia? Amongst the big tech companies, is it a us versus them, or are some of them leaning in towards the fact that there has to be some structured regulation?
It's an interesting one. I don't think it's I can't generalize about the big tech companies. There are different voices within them. So if you think about a company like OpenAI or Google DeepMind, they both emerged from people and companies who seemed to be genuinely very, very concerned about the threats that AI could pose. In some cases, they were concerned about big existential threats, AI taking over the world or worse. And I believe that people maybe like maybe even Sam Altman and Demis Hassabis at the beginning genuinely did seem to have genuine concerns about that. There are people who think that's been slightly skewed and corrupted by big money and the need to generate big sums of money. But I think there are. I don't think it's a goodies and baddies narrative necessarily as between the companies. I think there are
sort of a meshing together of an issue, as you say, that has to be done. And just lastly, briefly, the common ground that we touched on with Grok and the sort of what it was doing. Where is the common ground between the middle powers that you mentioned, Mark Harness, the EU, the US, and China, if it came to some form of sort of joint regulation that obviously wouldn't touch on the authoritarian democracy side of things?
Yeah. The low-hanging fruit is going to be things around, for example, deepfake intimate images, where China is also taking regulatory steps. I think perhaps around things like companion chatbots that form emotional relationships, particularly with children and young people, are giving rise to concerns. China's already taken steps around those that are not a million miles away from what is being proposed in certainly the EU. and what is being argued for and what is being implemented by individual states in the US. So if we were to find any kind of regulatory harmony, I think it would be around those low-hanging fruit issues.
And then once those negotiations or institutions have been set up to put in that regulation, you could, it would take years, but it could move on.
I think you'll hit a stumbling point quite quickly, though, where you're going to start getting pushback from the big tech companies and their US allies around the very distinctly US approach to free speech and free expression, where the low-hanging fruit is very low-hanging, but once you get a couple of branches higher up, I think there's going to be some quite fundamental political divergence along those.
Can I put out two questions? If you could answer, Colin, then I want to go round the panel again. One from Grant Barsom, which we touched on before. If there is no strict liability for misinformation, what mechanisms will companies use to spot and mitigate hallucinations that could cause real-world harm? And connected to that, and Ansing Tomar, might fragmented approaches to deregulation complicate cross-border collaboration, data sharing, trade, etc.? Your quick thoughts, Colin.
That first one, I think my concern at the moment is that what we're seeing is quite a lot of responsibility shifting. So the example Giulia gave earlier of lawyers using this technology and then putting completely made up cases and references before the court, another one today. The tech companies are basically saying that's on you to check it. The courts are basically saying to lawyers, that's your responsibility to check it. Cognitively, that is going to be very hard. Practically, the putative time savings of using AI could be eroded quite substantially if we have to check all of its homework. So I think there's really big questions there about hallucinations and errors from AI that are a long way from answering.
JB Branch, what are your thoughts on that? Because we touched on it when you began.
With regard to the liability regimes?
Yeah, well, yes, the liability, the quotes hallucinations that we just talked about. And also, if you could touch on an Ansing Tomar's thing, might fragmented approaches to deregulation complicate cross-border collaboration, data sharing, etc.?
So to the first point, I mean, I think there will always be a responsibility on working professionals to be able to check their work, especially in critical career fields like law or medicine. But I think when we have these large language models that are operating in those industries, if they're enterprise models, they do need to be specialized towards the field at hand. And so I think that's part of the issue that we have, that there are so many Gen AI systems where the data fields are so broad that it's pooling from all sorts of information. And so as a result, it can provide generic information that is potentially not helpful or an error or hallucination. To the second point, could these fragmented models hurt cross collaboration? I think that's a potential point. However, what most companies often do is they tend to tether themselves to the strictest standards. That's the Brussels effect, or in the United States, the California effect. And so I actually don't think that is as complicated of an issue as folks think that it is. In fact, there's plenty of technologies that these companies use, toggling, geofencing, that allows them to, target specific jurisdictions. So I actually don't think that'll be a large deal. If we can agree on broad fundamental principles, that can be helpful as well.
Thank you. And Giulia Gentile, can I put one more in the mix for you? From APS Rator, artificial intelligence saves thousands of employee hours due to low regulatory friction. But what is the strategy for redeploying that human talent into higher value work? Is there any strategy, or are we going to have massive unemployed people?
That's one, I think, of the core issues that we're experiencing as a society, that if, of course, AI takes over jobs, and this is, for instance, pushing companies such as Amazon to declare, it happened just today, to declare that they would lay off many of their employees to deploy AI in strategic areas. What we will see is massive unemployment. And the strategy, I don't think, is there. The European Union is enhancing digital skills. The UK as well, of course, is pushing very hard to train new generations to be savvy, of course, in the field of tech and AI, but there isn't really a market strategy that looks at redeployment of employees made redundant by AI.
And I just want to put one very quick yes or no question to you. Do you believe with Colin that that's only low-hanging fruit that can be common ground and that you're very quickly going to become to obstacles? Yes or no?
Well, that's a complicated question. I think I think the let's put it in these terms. The hanging fruit is very low. I agree with this part of the statement.
It's very low.
It's very low.
JB, do you agree with Colin, or is he wrong?
I mean, yeah, I think the very low hanging fruit will be quick to agree upon, but you know, I do think that there are, you know, broader principles, I suppose, advertising towards children. I don't know if that's considered low hanging fruit or not, but some of these are a little tense, especially when you consider the American perspective that is so, you know, pro corporation, focused on that corporate aspect. But again, I think that those are values that should be shared more or less globally.
Thank you very much. Please stay. We're now going to go to the chair of the Democracy Forum, Barry Gardner, who is. Please stay. We're now going to go to the chair who's going to sum up. Barry Gardner. Feedback there, who's going to sum up on what we've just saying, and then I'm going to come back to each of you just to give us a top line on your final thoughts on the global implications of AI deregulation. Barry, over to you.
Hello.
Hello,
Can
Barry.
you hear me?
Hello, Barry.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. I can.
Good. My apologies. I've had to follow you on phone because I can speak, but I can't listen, or I can listen and I can't speak. So we thought we'd sorted it out before the show, but it didn't quite work. How fascinating. Look, I never thought that I was going to speak of Kellyanne Conway and Friedrich Nietzsche in the same sentence. But you have both, all of you have prompted me to do that. But you didn't use either the words epistemology or perspectivism. This idea that perception and knowledge are always bound to the interpretive perspective of the person who is regarding whatever the situation is. And yet this is absolutely fundamental to what we've been talking about today. Let me add a note of caution at the beginning and perhaps a slight criticism, and that is that Charles started us off with the title here, to look at the economic, security, and geopolitical implications of deregulation of AI. I think we've talked a lot about regulation, how we might do it, how the difficulties posed from it. I don't think we've looked actually at the economic and security and geopolitical implications in real depth. That would be my criticism. But it's been really great to get our three speakers, for once, all agreeing, and if I quote them, JB said, "Is it consistent with human values?" That was after he gave his definition originally. He said, "Is it consistent with human values?" Giulia Gentile said, "One of primary questions is what we mean by progress." And when it came to Colin Gavagan, he concluded, yes, there is regulation, there always will be regulation. How does it give effect to our values and priorities? So I think what we're seeing is a consensus around the value systems that AI is going to have to operate in. And of course, that leads us to another epistemological problem, another perspectival difference. If we do not share the same value systems, then we're going to end up permitting and actually regulating AI in order to operate in very, very different ways. And so if I go back a little, where JB was talking about the regulatory framework is fragmented, it's difficult to regulate across borders, large language models concentrate information power. And I think this is, again, a recurring theme here. If AI is deployed into the policing, the security areas, and it imports discrimination, bias into that, if there are false alarms incorporated into it, then actually we end up having a tool that is giving us more problems than we started with. And of course, he spoke about Grok, the 3 million non-consensual deepfakes of women involving women in intimate situations. And the 20, I found that staggering, 20 million, I think he said, non-consensual deepfakes regarding children. So how to approach algorithmic control was what he posed. Extraordinary to find from him that some of these models don't allow us to talk about or to ask questions about Trump and Epstein or ICE. And he again said, look, the algorithms, we need a rights-centered approach, giving prior safety standards and post hoc challenge, transparency, and accountability. Humphrey asked a very critical question at that point, which was, who's the we here? Who's the we that needs this? And again, that's where we break down into the value systems, I think. Giulia spoke again, I say, of the improvement of technology for the benefit of all. She talked about medicine, she talked about transportation, and then said, but investments into the technology drive it. And so the direction of progress is actually in the favor of the investor. And here we're up against the fundamental problem of it could do a lot of things which I imagine anybody on this panel or listening would say are really good applications of AI, getting more targeted medicines that can treat diseases, enabling more efficient transportation or so on. But then if actually what is driving the direction of innovation is actually the investment that's going into it, then it is concentrating power into the hands of the investors. So she said the actors and companies who drive the human condition in reducing poverty, hunger, exploitation, that's what we need. The regulation is necessary to evolve a hierarchy of values, democratic human progress. So, but this again, it breaks down into this Nietzschean conundrum, if I can put it that way, that dependent upon your perspective, dependent on your core set of values, is where you're going to how you're going to apply your regulation. EU digital omnibus, heightened risk, she said, fake citation cases where lawyers and judges are relying on it. These are deeply troubling. And of course, at the end, we were talking there about how the time saving that AI could give us could actually be lost because of the time taken to check whether it's reliable, whether it actually relates to something in the real world, and the whole responsibility shifting that is going on. And there, I think, when Colin talked about, I thought very interestingly about the divergence between the innovative deregulation in the US, the EU approach, being much more what we would perhaps look at as comprehensive and democratic, and then when he raised that wonderful speech of Mark Carney's at Davos the other week, where Carney talked about the middle powers, but framing not simply being binary. Again, he said it's already being regulated, but putting the guardrails around the chatbots, Trump's deregulatory task force pushing back against copyright infringement from artists, and pose the question, is regulation inherently stifling, or is it necessary to create the market? If you're playing a game, sometimes you want to break the rules, but without the rules, there isn't actually a game. So it's getting that balance. I think if we go back to the question of non-consensual publication and responsibility shifting, one of the key issues here, of course, is how do you get at the people who are doing the things that the regulation that we already have, the laws that we already have, would say are illegal. But actually, if the platforms say, well, we're not the publishers, we don't publish this, and therefore you can't proceed against us, it then becomes very difficult to reach in and enforce the law. And I think that's one of the real fears that people have, that they cannot get access to the justice that the existing laws would give them, if in fact what is going on these platforms. I'm over time, so I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Barry Gardner, thank you very much for that. I would like to go round the panel again, just for your 2 or 3 words thought. The global implications of AI deregulation. Those implications, JB Branch.
I think my takeaway would just be, AI regulation is not about slowing innovation. It's about aligning the technology with values. History shows that global cooperation is possible. The world's agreed upon international standards for aviation, nuclear safety, public health. And it's not because our laws are all identical, but it's because the risk of inaction is too great. We're never going to achieve universal agreement on democratic principles, perhaps, and authoritarian regimes won't share similar political values, but we don't need perfect consensus to act. There's meaningful alignment on fundamental human norms, and that's what we should be focusing on.
Very good. Giulia Gentile.
I would add to this that the evidence of harms that are materializing as a result of AI is there. There is no evidence debate. Oh, sorry, I could hear
yes, there was a
an
feedback.
echo.
Carry on. Yes.
But I wasn't sure whether someone else was speaking. But so what I was saying is that there is evidence around the harms that AI is producing. There is consensus and evidence around this. The question is what we do with the knowledge that we're now building around the risks and the harms of AI.
Thank you very much. Colin Gavagan.
Thanks very much. Really, just to re-emphasize the issue that what we're talking about regulating is people, not things. It's not AI that's the target, it's the people behind it. But Barry made a good point about security and geopolitics. A part of the UK's stated agenda is to develop a sovereign AI capacity that sees us as AI makers rather than takers, and that is not overly dependent on decisions made far away. But how is this to be realised? Presumably, I would say not by giving a free pass to the same giant US-based tech companies that already dominate search, social and online shopping, and have at times demonstrated the readiness to sacrifice principle for profit and power. So this is, I guess, my big concern, that AI is used to concentrate even greater wealth and power in the hands of a very small number of individuals and corporations who perhaps do not share values aligned with liberal democracy.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So much more to talk about, but time's winged chariot has attacked us and we have to end. Thank you, JB Branch, Giulia Gentile, Colin Gavagan, for your forensic insight on this very important issue. And thank you all at the Democracy Forum for making this debate happen. It was fascinating. Our next Democracy Forum debate is on February the 10th at 2 p.m. London time. And the title, The Rightward Shift in European Politics and Wider Implications. Has AI got anything to do with that? A gripping strip from the headlines issue. Please join us then, February the 10th. And until then, stay safe and goodbye.
The Democracy Forum is a not-for-profit organisation founded in 2009 under the patronage of Baroness Nicholson of Winterbourne. Its principal goal was to work for the furtherance of democracy, peace and the rule of law in order to counter religious fundamentalism and intolerance in our global communities. In an increasingly fractured world, this goal continues to be the driving force behind all of the Forum's activities. Lord Charles Bruce is the current president of the Forum. Since its inception, the Forum has hosted and co-hosted seminars on a wide variety of topics relating to democracy and human rights across the world. The Democracy Forum encourages academics, students, journalists and other socially and politically conscious people to attend our seminars and to participate in the question and answer session. Details are available on our website, thedemocracyforumlimited.com.